They're in the center of the transparency debate. From Cadent, here's Nick Troiano, Simulmedia, Michael Zimblist, and from 2Mogul, please welcome Matthew Doherty. Moderating the panel is Trillia's Lizzie Kornblit.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My first piece of business before we get into what everybody's excited to hear about, which is audience buying and transparency, is that Nick today is being replaced by Rick, graciously, from Cadent, who has also graciously permitted me to call him Nick if I forget that his name is Rick. So welcome to all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you also for being amazing sponsors of this awesome event today. We've heard so many awesome things already. I'm excited to get into it. And so with that, I am going to ask you guys a question, my first question of the day, which is, we're talking about transparency, and that can mean so many different things to so many different people outside of advertising. So from your organizations and the companies that you guys represent, how do you define transparency in this industry, and what is the biggest barrier to it? So, Rick, we'll start with you, since you're the newbie.
We're really happy to be here, and I think we define transparency as visibility, verification, and insights. So we're big supporters and truly believe that all these plans need to be third-party verified, and obviously that's been an issue in the industry of late. So third-party measurement is critical. Then we think we really need to be insightful in every inventory and every impression that we deliver against our plans. So we deliver against 200 MVPDs. We share that with our partners. And then we're accountable for every impression by network, by daypart, by DMA, by program on the back end. So we really think transparency has a lot to do with reporting. And I think the barriers can be overcome through communication, collaboration, and working with the partners to be fully transparent.
Awesome. Michael?
No, I would agree with that. That was a very thorough definition that I would agree with. I mean, I think we think of, transparency as being very open about where inventory units run, and we are operating that way now. I think a lot of the discussion about transparency has been about the lack of transparency in the digital ecosystem. We operate in linear television, and a lot of the discussion about transparency in the digital ecosystem has been fostered by a lot of non-human traffic. Fortunately, only humans can turn on a television set. Whether they're actually paying attention or not is a different story.
All right, Matt.
Yeah, I would agree. In full disclosure, we work very closely at 2Mogul with Cadent, and so I think it's a pretty good sign that we share a similar view on what transparency means. I think ultimately it comes down to accountability, right? Being able to be accountable as a publisher, but also as an advertiser, so that you're moving away from this black box buying model where you can sort of be a little bit more informed on what exactly you're going and transacting on. I think what's been exciting for Tube, being sort of a more digital-first company moving into TV, has been this convergence of these two type of disciplines and what digital can bring to TV from that kind of accountability and transparency aspect. So I think one of the challenges, though, is that there's going to have to be sort of buy-in from both sides. The demand side needs to create tools that the supply side can also plug into, so that we can really look apples to apples across what we're transacting on.
So I think what you just said, Matt, I want to kind of dig into that, which is in the video space, obviously from a data perspective. Nielsen has been providing so much rich syndicated data for us, but as we move to applying some of these digital practices to linear television, obviously a lot of advertisers are looking into bringing more audience data to the table outside of Nielsen. So the theme of today is talking about 2020. By 2020, do you believe this will be a reality, or will we still be talking about Nielsen data when we look at television?
I think there's a couple of things going on at once that your question intersects with. One of them is that brands and advertisers are all right now spending a tremendous amount of time developing their own customer data. Even brands that traditionally haven't had touch points with customers directly in the CPG space. And you see that kind of trend accelerating with things like the acquisition of Jet by Walmart and Dollar Shave Club. So the most important data that any brand can transact on is their own data. And that data is proprietary to the brand. And that is at odds with the idea of us finding some sort of syndicated layer across all these different media touch points. So I would say this. I would say that we crave a common currency across all media. And we kind of wake up every morning and forget that the dominant theme of media that's going on right now is fragmentation. Our attention is fragmented across devices, across multiple screens, across multiple content sources, and I don't know why we don't recognize that measurement is becoming fragmented right at the same time. We sort of are blind to that. So I think that the most important data sources will be the brand's first-party data sources, and the most important measures will be what happens and does whatever tactics they use, whether it be Tube or Caden or Simul Media or any other, third-party data source, first-party data source, whether it drives the outcome they're looking for.
So if I can riff off of that, a lot of advertisers are kind of cultivating all of this wonderful first-party data. Are you running into roadblocks with either the application of that when it comes to media buying, and also maybe certain advertisers don't have as much readily available data that they can farm out? Because I know that first-party data seems like the dream, but is it really the reality, would you say?
I mean, I think more and more it is, even in a space like CPG. Certainly in retail it is. Certainly in automotive, I think it is. So, and then there's very good third-party data sources too for those that don't have first-party. So,
yeah, I think the device fragmentation thing, it's really interesting. I think that's why Tube, as a company right now, we're very bullish on TV manufacturer data, being able to use something like an IP address to proxy an audience or an individual across all their different devices and be able to navigate consumption trends across those different devices. I think there's definitely no kind of panacea right now. There's a bunch of sort of disparate data sets that we're either cobbling together, and it's not perfect, but it feels like that kind of is the right direction. So to your question about will we be there by 2020, I think we're already on our way, and maybe I'm an optimist, but I think yes.
And I will weigh in by saying I think we agree first-party data is crucial, especially when we come into a landscape of 2020 of greater addressability in the marketplace. And then I think as ATV evolves, we're going to need better estimates. We're going to need better reporting on the back end, and that's where industry groups like GABCON, the IAB, even in the TV landscape, Turner has a competitive audience estimate product that they're promoting. So you're going to see, I think, new players evolving to supplement Nielsen in that regard.
So in addition to new players coming to the table with third-party data in the interim, while a lot of different clients are creating their own first-party data sources and databases, do you feel that there's a mistrust when it comes to third-party data, either from a digital or a linear TV side? Are there things that advertisers and agencies and publishers can be doing to refine third-party data offerings and kind of do their due diligence to make sure they're buying what they think they are?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's not perfect right now. I think, unfortunately, it's kind of a nebulous space right now, right? We've known Nielsen for a long time. I think everyone's kind of accepted, generally speaking, that is kind of the best sort of data set that is going to span digital and linear activity demographically. And with the emergence of these new, TV MFR and what have you, data companies, I think, unfortunately, there is some, there's a little bit of confusion in the space. And so I think the onus is on sort of both, the marketers to be asking the right questions and make sure that they fully understand what, the specific data set entails and what's reasonably can be expected from a media purchase and media influence perspective. But we also need to do a better job, the vendors like Tube and others, really being proactive in that space and being vigilant to educate, hey, this is what this data set comes from. Yes, there's still going to be some modeled activity off of that, but again, it's kind of the best that we've got right now, and we're using this as sort of the jumping off point to future hopefully better solutions.
And I wouldn't say mistrust. I think it's a little bit more education and skepticism, because there are a ton of data in the marketplace, and almost every ad category has their own data set, which could be legitimate, but how are they developed, how are they refined, how are they updated is really key. And I think moving forward, data should have the same scrutiny as media should, because they're all working hands in hand, and I think we're going to see more of that. And again, I think standards will help that to some degree.
Yeah, and I think I'll bring it back to the theme of the panel of transparency. When you work with a third-party data source, they should be fully transparent about how the data is collected, how frequently, where it's collected from, how it's modeled, if they're projecting it outward, et cetera. And when it comes to a brand's first-party data, I mean, then they have vendors that they can rely on to help them cleanse and do what you will with it. But I wouldn't characterize the environment, at least from our perspective, as being as being mistrusting or lacking of trust. It's just that there's a lot of confusion because there's so much data, and which of it is useful and which of it isn't useful, and then there's like a lot of education to do.
And this is not, to draw a digital analogy, right? This is not dissimilar to the early days of behavioral targeting in digital, right? There was a lot, we were in the embryonic phases and we didn't necessarily know how to vet a true data set and how do we prescribe value to one versus the other. And that just came as the market and the data providers matured. I think so too did kind of our understanding of how to activate on it. And so I expect a similar kind of correlation on the TV side.
And a similar approach to testing small and then scaling large when you find things that work.
Okay, so we're sitting here in 2020. We're talking about the data ecosystem as it pertains to television, video in general. What does it look like, and who's coming to the table as a really strong winner in that scenario?
Well, besides the three of us,
Obviously,
panel,
you've got the three best ones right here.
The brands who make the investment now in the first-party data, in the analytical tools that they themselves bring into their operation, the brands that remake their marketing departments to be focused on outcomes and not just on media inputs. Those are the winners.
And I think the brands that are really forward-thinking in that regard, there's a lot of unique solutions in this room today, and to use those as complement to their core media plans to test and learn and see how those, kind of new progressive companies can make a contribution.
Yeah, I think the agencies too. I think the agencies that are able to kind of break down and look at and overhaul the way that they've been set up for maybe several years now in this kind of channel specific, you've got my broadcast team over here and I've got my digital team over here. Like the reality is a holistic approach is probably going to become a reality sooner than anyone maybe wants to admit because of the device penetration and eyeballs are getting fragmented and so is attention span. So I think the agencies that recognize this trend and are able to kind of realign their internal resources to match up with how we're seeing content be consumed in the real world are also going to be big winners.
It sounds like what you guys are saying is that in the ongoing quest for personalization and really creating an emotional relationship with your consumer, you really need to dig in now and apply those data learnings and build an infrastructure. So how do you think, what advice would you give an advertiser now to prep them for the future where everything will be more personalized?
Well, I would come back to know who your customers are, know how they behave, start all your planning around the consumer and the journey that the consumer is on, and break down the silos. Recognize people don't live in silos, neither should planning or buying.
I would say too, identify what data is important to you and what isn't. I think, we are in this advantageous position now where we can collect so much more than we ever had, but not all of it is necessarily going to affect business outcomes. And our role as marketers at the end of the day is to use the best data that we have available to move product off shelves. So, however that may be, make sure you're setting up a way to kind of gut check yourself at every point within the process to see, is this data that I'm activating on actually affecting business outcomes?
Yeah, and I think the process really is the consumer journey. So how does your media and marketing really parallel that from raw to more advanced to more addressable and really pushing the consumer down the purchase funnel?
Awesome, great. Well, our time is up. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.